What are like the biggest challenges you faced as an artist?
Well, really, one of the biggest challenges is simply, you know, arriving at, I guess, you know, some people call it your voice, you know, your voice as an artist. And I came to realize that as I got older, because, for instance, these paintings, I couldn't have painted these paintings when I was younger, because I was missing pieces of the puzzle. You know, I was missing information. I didn't have all the pieces that I needed. I made abstract work when I was younger, and it was kind of, you know, not as directed, or not as sure, or not as focused. You know, I didn't have as much rationale or anything behind it. The desire was there, but I didn't have, you know, something to really sink my teeth into. And, you know, I was able to later, after I lived a little longer, after some things were revealed to me, you know, stuff about me and other things that made this work possible I just didn't have access to when I was younger. So really, you know, living and waiting for that stuff to come to fruition was one of the biggest obstacles to, you know, maturing as an artist. My point of entry back into it was still kind of in the installation type thing. The first thing I did was really, I had an idea of how I wanted to make this arrangement of these bars and this form and all that stuff that was based on the pig iron stuff. And at first it was a little more literal. And so I went back to the farm where I was raised, and I went out into a field and I dug these holes into the ground, just like it was a pig iron mold, like from the blast furnace. But I didn't connect them like in channels like they were. I just dug a separate form for the one and another, and then this main channel that came down. And then I put this scaffolding up over top of it, and I got on top of it, and I shot it down with a digital camera, and I took pictures of it. And then I took it into Photoshop, and I just simply selected the ground and deleted it. And it left the holes, which now became positives instead of negatives. And the computer just kind of dithered the edges of the forms, and just making sense of where to cut it anywhere it could, you know. And this became the image. And I made digital prints of these, you know, and different versions of that stuff. And after a while, I started carving these pigs, which were, you know, what these kind of were to begin with, which were the bars of iron. And I started carving them out of wood and giving them faux finishes of metal, like rusted iron. And had, a lot of times they had marks in them, which were like from the forge where they were made. And so I had this topographical text on them that had incorporated different concepts like guilt and doubt and all these things that I wanted, content that I kind of wanted to drag into it in some vague way. And I built these, and I did all this stuff. And then I was like, well, I don't know what to do now, so I guess I'll try to kind of paint these images. And at first I had this real kind of system for how I wanted to paint it, because I was like, there's no way I can really paint this, because I can't, you know, the digital print thing I did with the digging the holes and all that stuff, I arrived at images and I couldn't really arrive at, you know, except through this process. So I'm like, I don't really know how I'm painting. And so I came up with this system, and I had some interesting results, and I did a series. And then I was like, okay, you know, and I kind of hit another wall. And then I realized, you know what, I'm back to being a painter. And so I've just forgot all that and attacked it anew from just a standpoint of, okay, I'm not worried about pig iron. I like this arrangement of these forms and the metaphor that they kind of represent to me. So I'm working with that, and I'm just going into it any way I can, just see what makes sense to me in terms of, okay, here's the problem I've given myself. Here's pain, here's this notion. What am I gonna pull from? And so finally, you know, I had like a breakthrough, you know, and I kind of knew what the paintings were about. And I was like, oh, I was like, I could have done this years ago. Why didn't I, you know? But really, I couldn't. I had to get there. You know? So, and that's how that began, and kind of left its origins behind and became its own thing. But that's how I arrived at it. So then, you know, the paintings, as they are now, came from that. And you know, I make These are the smallest ones that I've done, really. Generally, they're like 3 by 3 feet, 4 by 4 feet. Seems to be a comfortable size, considering, have limitations because of space at home and transport. I'm not an affluent artist, so I don't have teams of people helping me move these things. I have to do it myself and stuff.
Karthika loves to work really big.
Yeah.
Karthika likes to work big, so I use
I do too.
Yeah.
I like to work big. I wish I could work larger, but right now I'm like, well, I don't have to be able to haul them in,
Yeah.
And
So how do you, I know you have like a set composition, but do you choose what colors are going to go where beforehand, or do you just start painting and cut?
well, it's a little of both. The format can vary. I mean, I've kind of settled into 4 forms because I've kind of settled into a square format, which, I gravitated to the square format because it was more rational. It's like any decision that you make, I think it's one of the things I learned as an artist, that any decision you make, you're responsible for. So, I'm like, well, I don't really have a reason for it to be rectangular. And a square has a certain logic to it. All 4 sides the same. We'll go from there. The 4 bars kind of made sense in that format. Originally, I started with 6 because originally it was all more literal. And so there's one of me, and I had 5 half-siblings. So there were 6 bars. Okay, kind of autobiographical, but again, backstory. And one of them kind of tended to be more vague and faded out, than me, and then eventually I'm like, okay, let's do it. So it became more about any of them could be faded out, any of them could be coming or going, that sort of thing. And then I was like, well, it's no longer has to be 6. It can be 5, it can be 4, it can be. I've never gone less than 4 because less than 3 didn't feel right. 3 felt like, well, you're almost getting too sparse at that point. I need a larger group to conjure up the notions of the group belonging and set, members of a set and group and this sort of thing. So it fit more in my way of thinking. But so by and large, lately it's 4, but sometimes it can vary. So I have a certain kind of schematic that I know going into it. It can vary, but I know kind of, okay, I'm going to have, 4 or 5 or possibly 6 of these forms. They're probably going to be located a little bit lower in composition, maybe a little more space up top. Generally, they're equidistant, all things being equal, I'll put 1. This distance will be the same as this, as this, and of course, these will all be the same. And then going into that, I'll establish these forms, and then I'll violate them, and then I'll establish them, and then I'll push them away, and I'll bring them back, and that sort of thing, that whole painting thing. And in terms of color and stuff like that, I know I'm going to build it up in layers. I know I'm going to have a lot of underpainting, and I'm going to come over it because I want that richness, and I want depth to it, and I want to have the ability to annihilate it and bring it back and find that balance that I want in any given composition. Colors, it kind of depends on what I did the last painting. I have a tendency to work on more than one at a time anyway. I have several going at once. And that kind of dynamic, one will affect the other in terms of, if I'm using a lot of red over here, I might not use it here, or something like that, as simple as that. Sometimes I'll work singularly and kind of have an idea. I think I want to use this group of colors and that sort of thing. Lately, they've had a tendency to have kind of an overall color, like blue or whatever. But yet, there's a lot of other colors in them, that you discover upon closer inspection, or that can, balance in there. It has a tendency to just work itself out, instance by instance. Lately, I've been thinking that I want to do some different things with the color, because they started off kind of drab and grayish, and lots of shades of gray, lots of shades of tan and brown, and with flashes of other color. And then slowly I introduced brighter colors, and now I'm starting to think I want to do kind of something in between, or have some broader juxtapositions of color, like more than one predominant color kind of competing, that sort of thing. But it's all from piece to piece and cycle to cycle. I also work outside. Again, because of restrictions, I have a small studio, not a lot of space, and it's full. So it's in my backyard. So I have a tendency to open the doors and work on sawhorses out in front of my studio. I didn't tend to work outside. And so painting kind of becomes seasonal for me. I can't always work because of the weather. So, to me, spring and summer is painting season, I work for as long as I can. In the fall, winter comes, I kind of have to slack off. It's time to take stock of what I've done, and then document and try to get things out for people to see, and build panels and get ready again for the spring when I can work really hard again. That sort of thing.
Could you describe your painting process? Just go a bit more into detail about do you carve into your wood or things like that, or do you use a palette knife?
Well, first of all, I build panels either with Luan or masonite, 3/16. I frame them out with 1x2s and brace them up, and that's the support that I work from. Currently, I work in acrylic. Years ago, I used to work in oil. And what I do is I size the support